After having covered the Guardians, Mages and Hunters already, it's time to cover the Assassins when it comes to the best new or changed items for Season 4, which is exactly what we're gonna do in today's video. Keep in mind that some of these items may change within the next patches, maybe some of the values may be slightly off because something is not really included in the patch notes or something like that. So this is not necessarily 100% accurate and I may have missed out on some tiny details. Please understand that this may happen with this sort of thing. Also, there is a certain overlap between Hunter items and Assassin items. If you're very specifically looking for items only for basic attack Assassins, then you can look at the Hunter video as well, simply because some Assassins, for example, can make use of Ikaival as well, but I had to limit it somewhere because otherwise I could have covered everything for Hunters, Warriors and Assassins for the Assassins only, simply because they can make use of so many items depending on how they're built. With that, let's get into the actual items. The first changed item is Bamba's Mask. Bamba's Mask now costs 500 gold, provides you with 50 health, 50 mana, and a passive that gives you 15 true damage on basics versus camp, 15% extra ability damage versus camps, and plus 4 gold and 25 mana for every jungle creep that you last hit. The last hit part is very important here. If one of your teammates last hits the target, you're not getting that bonus gold. So this is something you and your teammates need to pay attention to. But overall, the item is very, very strong. It gives you some extra sustain, it gives you some extra damage, it gives you some extra tankiness even. Only missing some MP5 that it previously had. So I think there's really no reason to not build it as a jungler, especially with how cheap it is. The next starter that is probably going to be picked up a lot is Bluestone Pendant. Bluestone Pendant, 800 gold, 15 physical power, 50 mana, 5 MP5, and 30 damage over 2 seconds, which can stack up to 2 times. This is nothing new, you know this item. What sets it apart here is that it has the MP5 and the extra damage, allowing for very, very high early aggression and still giving you some sort of extra mana sustain in the jungle. So it's such a very strong choice for those junglers who can make great use of the passive and who will really look for that early aggression with abilities. An item that previously wasn't picked up by junglers all that much is Death Toll. Death Toll costs 800 gold, has 10 physical power, 100 health, 8 health and 3 mana per basic returned whenever you hit a target. So it gives you a massive amount of sustain. But don't undervalue the potential of Death Toll as an early boxing trading item. While it may at first seem like Bluestone Pendant is always the better choice in that regard, there are many things that factor into Death Toll being so good in the current meta. Death Toll only has 5 less physical power than Bluestone Pendant, really not a significant value. In return, Death Toll has 100 health, and that means you can basically run 4 Bluestone ticks through and you would still survive, assuming that you have a little bit of base defense and Bluestone doesn't tick for the full 30 damage, which it never should really. So as such, if the enemy doesn't have penetration, which they won't early, you will probably get around 25 damage max. So you basically survive 4 full ticks of Bluestone Pendant, and you also get 8 health per hit on the enemy back. So you can easily survive at least 5 ticks of Bluestone Pendant, or 5 instances of Bluestone Pendant, and no one's gonna drop 5 abilities on you early game because they don't have 5 abilities in a 1v1 scenario. So because of that, in a trade, Death Toll will pretty much always win against Bluestone Pendant. The only reason that Bluestone Pendant is still gonna be favored by some is that you have faster clear time and that you can just burst squishies that don't build into Death Toll faster, for example mages in middle lane. So really consider the effectiveness of your starter based on the game. Both are very good in combination with Bamba's Mask. Which one is better depends on the situation and depends on the character you're playing. With that, let's move on to the non-starter items. Brawler's Beatstick received 2 changes. The cost was dropped to 2200 gold. It still has 40 physical power, but it now has 15 penetration. The anti-healing is still 40% for 8 seconds. Brawler's Beatstick is still better now. This is not only because it's cheaper, but also because healing is just gonna be more in-combat focused, and you can counter in-combat healing with Brawler's Beatstick. You always could. But now that the in-combat healing is more, well, prominent, Brawler's Beatstick gets higher effectiveness. On top of that, Brawler's Beatstick is not really changed in its whole design, so it's still very much an ability-focused item. It's an item that is for ability-based characters. Whereas Crusher, which was formerly competition in regards to the raw stats, has been changed, so that kind of makes Brawler Speed Stick stand out a little more in that regard, and you will see it being picked up quite often as an early anti-heal item. The Crusher, like I said, was changed as well. It has a interesting hybrid function now. The Crusher costs 2,300 gold, actually more expensive than Brawlers now. It has 30 physical power, so 10 less than Brawlers. It has 15% attack speed, 15 penetration, and successfully hitting an enemy guard with a basic attack will subtract 1 second from all your abilities currently on cooldown. This effect can only occur once every 5 seconds. For some assassins like Awilish, this item will probably become core because of this effect. So what you have to keep in mind is that this item is a very mixed item with power, attack speed and pen. So it's best on hybrid characters or those who can at least make a little bit of use of the attack speed on the item. But the passive is something that is somewhat of CDR but also not really CDR. It depends very much on how long the cooldown of your abilities is. But on a 10-second cooldown ability, this would be basically 10% CDR if you hit it once. Or if you hit 2 basics, it's actually 20% CDR, so this can be very, very effective. The problem, more or less, of this item is that it only procs on guards and not on minions. So this item, if you want to build it, really requires you to be very aggressive, very in your face with the enemies. And that's something that I think you have to keep in mind. This is something you want to use when you play, for example, Thor and you teleport to the enemies constantly and just smack them. Then you can make good use of this, despite of attack speed maybe not being the best stat for Thor. But if you're playing a little more farm-oriented and more careful, then this item may not even be that great for you. So this is something that you should always keep in mind with the Crusher. Overall, it has great stats, so it should often be picked up. The next item is Ancile. Ancile hasn't really changed much, but the change is good. So Ancile costs 2,000 gold, has 25 physical power, magical protection, 10% cooldown reduction. Nothing new. What has been changed is that when you take magical damage from an ability, the silencing shockwave now procs every 30 seconds instead of every 1 minute. This means that this item will be up quite often, and this is very strong against certain mages that need to be in your face, like for example Ao Kuang or Morrigan. And I feel like this item has been undervalued for a long time anyways, but with this very short cooldown, I feel like it's gonna be a lot more potent. It's still gonna be overlooked because it doesn't have the natural stats that many people are looking for, but I think it's gonna be great. The next item is Heartseeker. Heartseeker now costs 2,100 gold, has 25 physical power, 10 penetration, 10% movement speed. The new passive is, every successful basic attack gives you 1 stack of focus. At 5 stacks of focus, your next ability consumes the stacks and deals bonus damage equal to 100% of your physical power to the first enemy guard hit. In this case, it's actually very good that it only procs on guards, so you cannot lose the stacks accidentally when you're looking to use them in a gank. But overall, the prime jungler item basically in its core. You have power, you have penetration, you have some movement speed to rotate faster, and you get that, well, extra damage from your first ability, which you're gonna use on pretty much any assassin. So, very strong item, relatively cheap, very good early pickup now, if you're not looking for cooldown reduction all that much. 2 items that I will just briefly glance over because I've already covered them in the Hunter section and they kind of have the same function here. Wind Demon and Poison Star. Wind Demon, 2,600 gold, 30 physical power, 10% attack speed, 20% critical strike chance, and crits still increase your attack speed and movement speed by 20% for 5 seconds. Great item, great pickup, still very worth picking up, stronger than before with the attack speed. For those assassins who make use of crit, this is very good. For those who don't make good use of crit, don't build it. Poison Star, 2,200 gold, 30 physical power, 15% attack speed, 15% critical strike chance, and the crits affect the enemy in the way that they are slowed by a poison, 20% slow, and the damage in output is decreased by 20%. Very strong item now. I think we're at the point where I can confidently say I would build this before Wind Demon on Mercury, despite of the bonus power from the movement speed, simply because it's such a cheap item, so accessible, and such a strong effect at this point. I feel like it's gonna get nerfed eventually, but that's another matter. With that, we're moving on to Hasten Fatalis. Hasten Fatalis has been picked up by some assassins. It's gonna be the same ones as before. 2,150 gold, 10 penetration now, 20% attack speed, a little less, and the passive that takes away the attacking movement speed debuff. This is especially good for Kali and Bakasura. Those are the assassins that really make great use of Hasten Fatalis. Pretty much anyone else who didn't build it before doesn't make much use of it now. A little more though, so if you really want to argue that you need it in your build, then you have 10 penetration to make a point with that. I would still not necessarily build it on those who don't really need it. Stone of Gaia is one of those items that doesn't necessarily scream assassin when you see it, but this item is actually pretty damn good now. 2000 gold, 400 health, 25 HP 5, 15 MP 5. You're immune to knockup when you get hit by knockup for 1 second, or CC immune even, and you get 2% of your maximum health back every 5 seconds. This is an item that I would just simply build against a team comp that has a lot of knockups, or is focused on the knockups. Sylvanus, Tyr, Willish, anything like that. And I think this item will fulfill its function there, and I think it does a little better as such than, for example, Magi's Blessing could. So I think this can be a very great choice. And with the sustain, you can definitely build more into a secondary frontliner tanky build, for example on Thor or Fenrir, in combination with a Spirit Robe or a Mantle of Discord. And then you have very tanky stats because you have the health on this and some defense on the other items. As for the new rituals, the one that I've often mentioned already is Flickering Ritual, the new combat blink, 750 gold, and allows you to teleport while in combat as well. A very strong item, nothing more to say here, you've heard it 3 times by now. The other one, once again, Rallying Ritual, 750 gold as well, allows you to teleport to another god, teleport to gods basically. Very strong option as such for somebody who is often able to push structures as well. With that, let's get to the question marks, the items where I think they are good, but there are reasons why I wouldn't necessarily name them as the best items. The first one is Rangda's Mask. Now Rangda's Mask, stat-wise, is amazing, don't get me wrong. It costs 500 gold, it only gives 5 MP5, but at 6 stacks it gives 7% movement speed and 10% CDR. At 16 stacks it gives 15 pen, 10% movement speed and 15% CDR. Overall great stats, and these stats are very much beneficial for pretty much any assassin, at least 2 of them. And you get 2 stacks for every kill and 1 stack for every assist. The problem with the item is that it only really gets its full value at 16 stacks. In a game where you're ahead, 16 stacks are an easy task, but in a game where you're behind, 16 stacks can be very tedious to achieve and it can be very problematic, and you still spend that 500 gold on the item. The stats for 6 stacks are also not the best. 10% CDR is great, 7% movement speed is great, but early on you need penetration, you need power, and CDR alone is usually not going to cut it. Whereas what you would want early on is the penetration, the flat penetration, which loses a lot of its value later in the game. And that is actually what you only get when you reach 16 stacks, which is quite late into the game often. It is still a great item, but I would not recommend rushing it. I would build it after boots maybe, or the next item after, depending on how well the game goes for your team and how many kills you think you will be able to make in a very limited time frame in order to get the effectiveness of this item going to at least some point. The next item is Runeforged Hammer. Runeforged Hammer is going to cost 2000 gold, has 40 physical power, 200 health, and an effect that is enemies take 10% bonus damage from you when they're affected by any form of crowd control. Pretty much any god in the game has some form of crowd control, even Nemesis has a slow or something like that, so that should not be a problem. Thing is, this item is really hard to calculate. The damage from this item at certain points in late game, I think, should be pretty damn good, and it still has 200 health, which means you're a little more tanky as well. And 40 physical power is not bad. It does need some other items first, it needs some penetration or something like that, but it's definitely not bad. I just really don't know how much 10% will be in comparison to a full damage item. It's something where a lot of numbers needs to be crunched in order to determine how good this item actually is. The last item is Soul Eater. Soul Eater, I've mentioned this with the Hunters, 2200 gold, 20% lifesteal, 200 mana, 20% crowd control reduction, and hitting an enemy with a basic attack heals you for 2% of your maximum health per hit. But the item does not have any form of direct damage contribution. This item is purely sustain focused, purely not even with health, just with lifesteal, and you need to make that work. I think it can work very well for certain characters, maybe Kali, maybe Bakasura, something like that, but once again, this is something that needs to be figured out how effective it will really be. That's it for the Assassins. Thank you very much for watching. If you have not seen the Conquest guide from yesterday, I would highly recommend checking it out. It covers everything you want to know about Conquest in Season 4, including all the starts, the starter items for different roles, and so on and so on. So please feel free to check that here. Links will be up in the top right corner. And with that, thank you for watching. I hope to see you for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.